something else people ask about is, going from race trim to practice trim, practice trim to qualifying trim to race trim, and weather changes and whatnot. It's one thing you can't control, right, is the weather, especially time of season as it changes. As far as, so like we'll start with practice, right? So when I start in practice, right, I always watch my cross member travel. I'm adamant about watching the cross member travel. So in practice, on your standard like 1/4 to 3/8 mile normal bank tracks, nothing high bank, but just your normal kind of regular Saturday night tracks. I usually shoot for being somewhere between like 1/4 inch off the cross member on the left side and 3/8 on the right side by the end of practice, so that I know when I drop my pressures to start the race. To me it's small victories, right? So at the end of the race, no matter how it went, if I look at a cross member, and I'm flush on the left side and 1/8 on the right side, I'm like, well, I didn't leave any on the table there. Like, I got all I could get there. Maybe we still weren't great, or maybe we won, but you look for all the things that you feel like you did it right. Like, okay, we hit all of our travels right, we guessed how much we needed on the cross member right from practice to race. We didn't bottom out for the first 10 laps. So that's something that you work on, so that you leave yourself some room. And then it depends on the track, right? So if you're at a high bank track like a New Smyrna, I've said before, you're going to want to leave 3/8, probably a 1/2 inch really on the left side and a tick more on the right side in practice, which seems like a ton. But when you drop the pressures to start the race at night, especially on F45s, like, you'll be all over the track if you're less than that. And then you gotta know if you're impound racing or not. If you're not impound racing for qualifying, you're gonna be a mile in the air like that with the pressures up. So then you gotta be like, well, okay, so I'm gonna have my pressures up. I need to pull 3/16 of Packer out across the front, which is gonna give me more right front camber, which is gonna be better. But I'm gonna have to add some left front camber because I'm gonna lose some left front camber in qualifying. So you fix your camber for qualifying, and then as soon as qualifying's over, you put it back to how you practice, because that's how you're going to race, because the pressures will be down and the car will be lower for the majority of the race. So that's one thing that you always got to watch. If you're going from practice to qualifying, you can add Packer to the right rear, roll the right rear back, a round or half a round. Them are all things that you're going to be tighter when you go to qualifying anyway, because you're going to put a fresh left rear tire on. When you put your fresh tires on, typically I see people in practice, they get the car so good on 100 lap tires, so stable. And to me, on 100 lap tires, you better be on top of the track and free. If you're that good on 100 lap tires, you won't have to worry about lap 100, because you'll be a lap down, right? Because you'll be so tight the first 50 laps that you won't be able to keep up. So you gotta have a feel for how free do I need to be on old tires to be good when I put my new tires on and have a good left rear, because that left rear will overpower the whole car almost every time. That's why when most people stick her up, they're like, man, my car gets so tight when I stick her up. It's just the left rear. Like, you dialed it into a car with no left rear and then put one back on it. So that's something you just got to work on, figuring out your balance, what your balance needs to be for the tire deal, and then weather, right? So if you're practicing on a 70-degree afternoon and know you're going to race on a 40-degree night, you got to figure out what you got to do with that too, as far as adjustments. Like, okay, are we going to get tight tonight? Are we going to get free tonight? How much tape can we run? Because we're going to be able to run way more tape tonight because it's going to be cold than we did during the day. Or vice versa, right? If you're practicing in the morning and it's 70 degrees out, and you know that by the time you race tonight, it's going to be 100. You got to plan for that, because the track, it'll lose temperature as it gets dark, but it's still going to hold heat in it. It's still going to, it's not going to get cooler than ambient. So if the ambient degrees is 100 degrees, it's going to be 100 degrees. And that's going to change a lot on how your tire builds heat, how much pressure it builds, how sticky or how slimy the track gets, how much rubber it takes. When it's cold, it's more like a cheese grater and it just peels the rubber off. But when it's hot like that, it's more like taking wax and smearing it on the track. It just fills it in, and the more it fills it in, you got to chase your setup all day long, because it's kind of like when you go to a big race like the Derby or whatever, right? And you start out, it's Pensacola, right? So it rains almost every other day down there, so the track's green. But by day 4, right, you've been putting rubber in that thing for 4 days. It just fills in all the grooves. And now instead of going in the corner and sticking the tire, you look at your tire like you're driving over a piece of sandpaper, and it bites it and it sticks the right front tire, which energizes the jacking in the front end and shoves the front end in the track. Like, man, car turned great day 1. By day 4, I'm so tight. Well, now you're just driving in and around the wax, right? And it doesn't grip the tire, it just slides the tire across the rubber. Even though most people would think, well, it's taking rubber, the rubber should grab the rubber, but it's different. It just slides across it, so now it doesn't energize the jacking, so it doesn't push the car down. So now you're not getting the load and the stops that you were 2 days ago. So you got to come off a spring rate or come off of Packers to get the car back down, to get back into your camber. All that stuff plays into the temperature of the weekend, and what you're doing with your setup. So that's where you'll see in the spring, I think it's easier because you're a constant temperature and it's cold, and the track is more like a cheese grater, and it just peels the tire off. It doesn't stick it in the surface so bad. And then as you get into May, June, especially July, August, when it's humid and hot, all that rubber just fills every groove in the track, and you can see your track turns black, but when that's happening, it's like I said, it's like the difference between running your hand across some 36 grit sandpaper and then take a wax stick and fill that in and then rub your fingers across it again. Like, it just has no grip, and if it doesn't have that grip to bite the front tires, then it doesn't energize the jacking in the front end, so it doesn't pull the front end down into the bump stops. So at that point, you either need to come off some front spring or put more jacking in your car or do something to match that, to keep up with it. So to me, that's some things that you got to be aware of, in the big picture when you're chasing the track and going, whether it's going from just practice qualifying to race trim, things you got to change, and when the weather changes, that's a factor you have no control over. To me, that's typically why tracks have, they have more speed when it rains out in practice, and then you start with a green track. That's why NASCAR has a competition caution, right? Because they know that it's back to being like sandpaper again, and it's going to accord right front tires. So they want to give everybody a chance to look at it, because it's not a good race with only 10 cars in it. They want the whole field in there, so they want to give them a shot to catch a problem before it's a major problem. So those are things to be aware of. Hopefully that answers some questions from people.